never know what their backstory is and how much pressure they have on them in the world. And so I always just try to treat everyone as best I can and not make assumptions about who they are or where they come from just based on their complaint or their look or their age or anything like that.
Hello, and welcome to the Art of Emergency Nursing podcast. This is where we share stories for inspiration, entertainment, and encouragement, because we all know emergency nurses have the best stories. Now here's your host, Kevin McFarland.
If you follow any emergency nursing influencers, you may already be familiar with this week's guest. Her social media feed is filled with encouragement for nurses, educational pieces, and topics critical to the emergency department nurse. If you're not already following the New Thing Nurse, I'll highly encourage you to do so. My guest this week is the New Thing Nurse herself, Sarah Wells. Enjoy the show. So I will get started and ask you to introduce yourself and tell the audience a little bit about what your background is and what you do now.
Can do. So my name is Sarah Wells. I am an emergency nurse that has been working in emergency medicine since 2011. I work in a community hospital setting in the ER. That's where I started. I started my career in Georgia and have since moved to the Northern California Bay Area. And I work in a community hospital again, and I just feel like my career's come full circle. I really love it. We are an adult-only facility, but I work, our ER sees about 10,000 pediatric patients a year. So I do a lot of the pediatric care coordination as the lead pediatric champion at my facility. Awesome. I'm very passionate about pediatric care and supporting their families and their emergency medicine and emergency department experience. Since I've been going through my nursing career, it's evolved, and I've started a few other projects. So I started a business a few years ago called New Thing Nurse, and it's a social media group, a business of services, it's a blog. It's just evolved into so many things, and it's really an organization to help experienced nurses and new nurses with all their new things in their professional life, personal life, and academic life. And then I also am a huge advocate for two big things for me that are super important as a nurse and as a person. Mental health awareness. So I don't think we talk about nursing mental health enough. And I try to use all my platforms to kind of support people in knowing that if they're having a hard time, feeling blue, feeling sad, maybe worse, you are not alone. I have a long history of depression and anxiety. And so I think it's really important to know that you can be an excellent, successful nurse and have those things. And then I also am a huge advocate for workplace safety for healthcare workers. So I work with the Raise Your Hand campaign, which is an organization that was started by emergency nurses to help promote advocacy and awareness of the epidemic of violence against healthcare workers in the United States and internationally, and also to help collect stories from victims who have been assaulted in the healthcare environment and help gather data and crunch numbers and try to find evidence-based solutions to that epidemic. And that's me.
Holy cow. You got your fingers in a lot of different things and keep pretty busy, don't you?
Very. It can be a very full week.
I bet it can. So how did you get into nursing, Sarah?
So I was in high school, and they had a program called Follow a Nurse for a Day. And I'm from southern Georgia and from a small town and a small public high school. And I went to our small community hospital and got assigned to the emergency department. And it was a day that was like any other day in emergency nursing. It was pretty chill, and we were all just sitting around. And then all of a sudden, the bells, whistles went off. I didn't know what was going on. The emergency room doors opened, and in came a big stretcher, and there was a victim of some sort of agricultural trauma. I think it was a tractor accident was there, and there was blood and bone and everything showing, and I was like, this is amazing. So I got hooked pretty early and went off to college, had my own journey with that, and then wound up in nursing school, and it was probably the best decision I ever made.
Nice. Holy cow, I can't imagine a high school student being there for something like that and being like, what kind of trauma are we going to be causing to this poor young thing? Instead, what they were doing is planting the seed. Yeah, they're planting the seed of, this is going to be my career. How cool is that?
Yeah, it's a pretty great experience to look back on now. And it really, I think, did kind of plant the seed, because I knew I always wanted to do emergency medicine, and when they were in nursing school and like, keep your mind open to lots of different options, med surg, tele, ICU. I was like, no, I'm going to start in that emergency department, no matter what you say. And I did. And I've never left.
Good for you. Yeah. I'm you always hear people say that you can't start in the emergency department. I say, sure you can. Absolutely. It takes a special person. You need a lot of love and caring while you're there. I mean, certainly you can't just throw them in the deep end of the pool, but there's no reason that a new grad nurse can't start in the emergency department.
Absolutely. And I tell a lot of people that too, because they come to me and say, I want to start in the emergency department, but my professors are telling me it's a bad idea. And I always tell them, with the right support, with the right self-care, you can really thrive in any scenario.
Absolutely. I'm a firm believer of that as well. I also started straight in the emergency. I actually started straight in the pediatric emergency department.
Oh, wow.
Which was
That's so fun.
Which was a little intimidating. I'd worked for about 7 or 8 years as a ER tech at the local trauma center. And when I finished nursing school, I was like looking for a little bit of a challenge, and I wasn't sure that the ER was going to do it for me because I'd been there for so long, and I was maybe a little bit cocky, thinking, oh yeah, no, it's going to be, that's not going to be much of a challenge. I'm going to go to the peds ER. So I got the peds ER, and it was a challenge, and it was tough, and it was awesome, and I love it, and I still love taking care of peds patients. That's why I do that PRN.
Absolutely. I think there's nothing more fulfilling than really being able to help support not just your pediatric patient, but also the family. Because when you have pediatric patients, as you well know, you don't just have one. You have the patient themselves, and then also all their caregivers and loved ones around them. So absolutely. I just love that holistic kind of care experience.
Absolutely. Now, at what point after you became a nurse were you like, okay, this is right, this is exactly what I was meant to do?
I feel like it was probably, so I started on night shift like anyone, and I was in this community hospital ER, like I mentioned, and I think it was the night we had a trauma patient where it was an MVC where the car had gotten out of control in a high-speed accident. I think that car was impacted on a stationary object like a tree or something, and the patient was intoxicated and strapped down, and we were trying to do basically like a huge trauma workup in our little community ER at 3 a.m. And I was in CT and trying to like manage this patient, and then I was getting called and saying, we're bringing in, we're going to take him to OR, so get him packaged really fast. And I was just like that moment where I was like doing all the things, and it was all coming together for me, and I had the support of my team, and I was just like really felt part of the process. And kind of felt like I kind of knew what was going on. I was still really green, but like kind of knew what was going on. And I felt like, hey, I can really do this. And I really loved it. I loved that fast pace, get them in, get them out kind of trauma experience for the patient. And it was just one of those moments where like, a few minutes later, I was like, man, this is where I'm really supposed to be. That's
cool. That's awesome. It's so fulfilling when you feel that. You're like, that's awesome. Makes it all that hard work of nursing school worth it.
Yeah, and also those hard shifts where you're like, I don't know what I'm doing, because that's usually the more common experience. But the day it's like, oh, it all comes together. It's like, oh, this is what it's all about. This is what I'm supposed to be at.
Absolutely. Tell me about a patient that changed the way you practice.
So when I started my career, I never wanted to touch pediatric patients. I was like, they're little, they're weird, I can't do this. And that's how it was for like many years. And then after I'd been nursing for probably like 5 years or 6 years, I had moved to California. So I was in Northern California at a facility. I had a patient who was an adolescent, mid-high school age, maybe 16, and he had a newly diagnosed cancer and had just had a port placed and was about to start treatment. And he came in for shortness of breath. And he was a very healthy-looking guy. He hadn't started going through chemo or anything. And the triage nurse kind of just bumped him, I think made him an ESI 3. I wound up taking him after been waiting for a while. He was a little pale, but didn't look so bad. And then they took him to X-ray, got his chest X-ray done, and brought him to a room. And they were like, something's wrong. And it turned out he had what they thought was a pneumothorax. And like so many times in triage, we have this bias against, like, when healthy young kids come in saying even things like chest pain, shortness of breath, we assume that they're really okay and maybe just exaggerating things.
Totally.
But this guy really had a serious thing going on, but he still looked so good. He didn't have huge complaints. He was a little anxious. His parents were a little anxious, but otherwise looked pretty good. So the doctor needed to put in the chest tube, but was like, the guy can wait, it'll be fine. Well, he bumped him to a couple other patients that he had, and the kid started getting worse. He started getting more anxious, more short of breath. The oxygen was titrating up. His skin signs were not looking so hot. Still maintaining fine, talking. But I was being concerned. I kept talking to the doctor. The doctor was like, he's fine. He's 16. He hasn't gone through all the chemo. It's fine. And I was really trying to, the parents were really getting stressed out. And so I was trying to be that, advocate for the patient, the messenger between the doctor and the patient. And we were really busy, and it was late at night. We didn't have the staffing, probably should have had. And by the time we got to the chest tube, the kid looked real not well. And we wound up popping in the chest tube, and it wound up not being a pneumothorax. It was a hemopneumothorax.
That complicates
and
things.
About a liter and a half of blood came out once we put it in, and the kid was looking real pale. And I was like, maybe, doctor, don't you want to add on some repeat HNH and all these kind of things? And the doctor's like, that might be a good idea. And so then he went to go contact all the admission people and the surgeon who'd put in the port. And the kid was just starting to crump. And I was trying to really advocate to get orders in, to get the things done that he needed done. And there was a political of who, between the doctors, who owns this patient, who's going to put in the orders. Everything was taking way too long. Ultimately, we wound up getting the kid upstairs, but not before his hemoglobin had dropped from a pretty good 9 to a 4. And
that's a big
he
drop.
wound up real fast. And he wound up getting intubated, put in the ICU, transfused. It turned out his port had nicked something. He was bleeding into his thoracic cavity, and that was the day. And I spent so many hours with him and his parents by then. I wound up going to visit them a couple of times in the ICU. Ultimately, kid came back, received all kinds of blood in the meantime, and they got the bleeding stopped. Kid came back and was ultimately okay and went on to get treatment for his cancer, and doing really well. But that was that patient experience where I was like, I really made a connection with this kid, this family. I was like, we didn't do right by him because we underestimated the severity of his complaint just because he looked good, which we do so often. And I felt like I wasn't informed enough on pediatric care. So that's when I really started committing more time to getting into educating myself for pediatrics, just as a kind of reassurance that I could do the right thing the next time. And then I just really started falling in love with pediatric care and the advocacy component and the support component with the families. And now that's a big chunk of what I do at my local ER. And I really love it. And I find it every time we get something done right, I always have him and a couple other patients in mind saying, okay, I didn't do everything perfectly this time, but we're doing it a lot better for the next kid.
Nice. That's cool. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Tell me about your first error, your first med error.
Oh, I was still in nursing school. It was so bad. We were on, so I went to school in Georgia. We were on paper charting in the ER where I was doing my preceptorship. And there were 2 patients. I think I was taking 3 or 4 patients towards the end of my preceptorship. And there were 2 patients, and one was supposed to get a Norco, and one was supposed to get Decadron IV. And it was supposed to be IM, Decadron, and PO Norco. And I got them confused. They were both for kind of pain management for both patients. Both patients were in pain. One was having more inflammatory type pain, and one was having, I think, musculoskeletal pain. And I grabbed both the meds because we didn't have scanning back then. I didn't take the chart in with me to check the MAR because that wasn't the practice back then. And I just got them completely mixed up. It was one was in room 14, one was in room 15. And I gave IM Decadron to one and Norco to the other. Neither one said anything because they both thought it was reasonable because they were both in pain. I think the one who got the Norco was super pleased. And it took a few minutes. I was going back to like write the completion of the order on the paper mar when I realized what I'd done. And I flipped out and told my preceptor right away and was like crying and having a panic attack. And she was being hard but supportive on me. And she was like, ultimately neither person had a bad outcome. But she was like, you have to talk to the doctor and write it up. And so I went up to this doctor and like bawling at age like 24. I'm so sorry. I gave a Norco to the other guy and Decatron to the other one. And he goes, oh, well, I didn't really want to give that guy a Norco, but I mean, it's his lucky day. And he just wrote the order for both. And so it wasn't even an error, but I had to write it up. And I was like so ashamed and carried that with me for so long. But it was also one of those scenarios that taught me like the process is really important. And, paper charting, no barcode scanning. It was like earlier days of tech, especially in rural medicine. A lot of the current tech hasn't gotten there yet because it's expensive. They can't afford it. There's a tech like knowledge deficit usually for their staff. So we didn't have those supportive things to help me that would have probably caught those errors before they were ultimately reached the patient. But, it definitely taught me to triple check all your orders, always have the order at the bedside, always do all your patient right things, which used to be 5 and now they're like 25. And, it really just like be critically thinking and not just going through the motions.
Absolutely. It's hard because sometimes you feel like you're kind of just going through the motions. But if you really, think about, sometimes it's hard to be mindful and be like in the moment and doing what you're doing when your brain's going to the 4 other patients that you have to take care of as well. And as a new grad nurse, holy cow, it's nice to get that error out of the way early. Then you can just change your practice.
Absolutely. And, I definitely had 1 or 2 more errors since then. Luckily, I've never had that really catastrophic one that ever made harm to the patient, but it happens. You can't be perfect 100% of the time. And I
Absolutely.
think being kind to yourself and compassionate of yourself, and then analyzing like how did it occur. And when I was in my preceptorship in school, I was working night shift as a patient care tech to make money. I was doing day shift preceptor clinical rotations. I was going to school. I was like finishing all my projects and papers, worrying about the NCLEX, trying to get ready for applying for jobs. I was such a hot mess. And it really shows like you really have to take care of yourself, because who can think clearly when they're like not sleeping, not eating well, overly stressed. And so trying not to overcommit is really important for your nursing practice, trying to take time for yourself and getting enough rest and eating well, and all those things are really important too.
Absolutely. Self-care is an important thing. And oftentimes nurses are really good at taking care of others, not so good at taking care of themselves.
Oh man, isn't that the truth?
Like it's funny what a universal truth that is. It's just like everywhere, and it's everywhere, no matter where you go, no matter what, and it's not just ER nurses, it's every nurse.
Absolutely.
We're just really bad at taking care of ourselves, unfortunately. So.
Absolutely.
So. Tell me about a patient that touched your heart.
I feel like this happens frequently. I had one like very recently that was an undocumented immigrant kid who had gotten injured while trying to work to make enough money to help pay rent for him and his dad. He had just gotten here from Guatemala and trying to go through the process. He showed up by himself to the ER and trying to go through the motions of not just taking care of his medical needs, but also his like psychosocial needs, because he was really stressed out. He did not speak Spanish as a primary language. He spoke an indigenous dialect of another language. So he didn't quite understand. We didn't have that indigenous dialect interpreter service, even through our phone translator service. And he didn't know, the hospital system in the U.S. And then we were trying to get a hold of his family to come sit with him. He was by himself. It was just so many pieces to it. And to also see that this kid's like not getting to just grow up and be a teenager and go to school and live his life, but he has the pressure of He was really worried about missing work because he wanted to make sure that he could pay his part of the rent. And that reminding yourself that that's part of a person's daily experience can really make you remember the world's so big and people are going through so many things. And this kid just caught up in a lot of different things. And ultimately, we got him all fixed up and sent home with his family members. And we tried to give them as much supportive resources that we can. But it's hard to know that you're not going to fix everything for them, even though you might fix their medical problems.
Yeah.
But those scenarios make me really think, about my personal practice and how I go into a room, because it's hard, even though someone's there maybe for a hurt ankle or a cut hand or whatnot, you never know what their backstory is and how much pressure they have on them in the world. And so I always just try to treat everyone as best I can and not make assumptions about who they are or where they come from just based on their complaint or their look or their age or anything like that.
Yeah. Can you imagine having that kind of pressure as a child? I mean, having that pressure as an adult is bad, but to be a teenager and have that kind of pressure, it's just, I can't even imagine. I lived such a sheltered life that I was so, I was well cared for, I was well loved. And it just it breaks my heart when I hear about things like that.
Yeah. And especially with kids and young adults, they should be having, those carefree years where they can go make their own mistakes and, go experience the world. And to have so much reality so quickly, it's just
hard. It's
you
hard
want to take
see.
that off of them. Yeah. But you can't, but you can definitely, take care of them in multiple ways, just even in an ER visit or an orthopedic injury. So that's what I try to do.
Yeah.
Try to always make make sure they had food, make sure they have a way home, make sure they have follow-up resources, and then whatever happens after that.
Yeah.
Just what's going to happen. Yeah.
What's the best advice a nurse mentor ever gave you?
Never be scared to try things, and don't think about what other people think of you. I think are the best two pieces, because I think a lot of people don't try new things because they're scared of the outcome or repercussions. And I personally am really big perfectionist, shocker, as a nurse, and very type A. But if I was scared to try new things, every time I was scared of failing, I would never try anything new. And so I think nursing's really amazing because there's so much diversity in the field and so many options. And so I try to take advantage of as many of those as reasonably can. But I think I never would have done it if I hadn't had the right push and mentorship from more experienced nurses in the past and currently. And then I think you can't be too worried about what other people think. And that's really hard, especially in the social media era that we're in. But if you're worried about, other people's criticisms or opinions, you'll also not be willing to push yourself to grow and try new things. So I think those have been two really key pieces of advice that I've gotten in the past.
Yeah, I think I can't imagine growing up in the social media area that we are now, that it's hard now for adults. I can't even imagine for kids.
Oh yeah. When people talk about the generational differences of kids coming up now, and how they don't understand them, I'm like, you don't even have a point of reference. I remember when the internet was still new, I didn't always have a computer in my house. People more senior than me will go, well, I remember having, a rotary dial phone, and when TV was hot new thing when it was color. But
yeah.
As fast as tech is changing now, these kids have to be so on top of their game, but they also are getting so much feedback all the time and so much information all the time. I think we have to be real patient and compassionate with them, even if we don't quite understand their communication or interpersonal styles.
Absolutely. It just makes you wonder what's next. You're going,
right.
When we're old and gray and, sitting in our rocking chairs waiting to go to the ER from the nursing home. What's it going to be like for nurses who are taking care of patients then? I just can't even imagine. It's super cool. So
100%.
What's the worst advice anyone ever gave you?
Ooh, that's a good one. Probably that you can't start in the emergency department, because that was just an outright lie. I get really, a pet peeve is when people tell people what they can't do before they've even tried it.
Yeah.
And I think for me, it was like people in school telling me, well, you can't start in a specialty area, or you can't work while you're in school, or you can't do X, Y, and Z while you're doing other things. So I think the worst advice is when people tell me I can't. On the flip side, it's a good motivator to prove them wrong. But I think that's the worst advice, is when they tell you can't do something, because it's like, you don't even know. I haven't even tried yet. Just wait and see, kind of thing.
Right? You're like, just wait here and watch.
Exactly. Like, I wasn't even thinking about doing that, but now I'm going to do it just to prove you wrong.
Ain't that the truth? So, what advice would you give a brand new emergency department nurse?
I would say a couple things. One, never stop asking questions, because you know so little of all the things you need to know. And right when you think you know something, something changes. So always ask questions. And then two is try to be as flexible and open-minded as possible, because at the second you close yourself off from some new opportunity, new thought process, or anything like that, you're going to be behind. So I think it's so essential to have clear communication, ask questions, and be as flexible of a team player as you can to excel in the emergency department, because it's such a team dynamic. It's such an evolving clinical area.
Absolutely.
And things are changing so quickly sometimes. You have to stay up to date. You have to keep reading. You have to, be flexible in your time, in your education, and you have to be constantly ready to ask, like, what's next? What's the new thing? Ask questions as much as you can, because as soon as even 8-9 years into this, I don't know anything when I go into work. I have to ask, what's the new policy? What's the new standard of care? What's the new study that we're involved in? So you have to constantly be ready to ask questions and learn something new.
Absolutely. I think that's one of the most important things, is just being flexible.
Absolutely.
As an ER nurse, you never know what's going to happen. And I tell people all the time, you may have a day where you're sitting around not doing nothing. Not that happens very often. Or a day where you're like, oh, I get to take care of 6 patients because we have 3 traumas right now. Okay, well, that's what we're gonna do. We're gonna get it done. We're gonna take care of these patients and do what we have to do. That flexibility is key, and to be able to just do that. And some people just aren't wired that way. And luckily they can go work in the ICU. They can go work in the OR. There's good places for them too. So.
Yeah, there's a place for everybody in nursing. I haven't met anyone, I feel like, that I've been like, there is no way you will succeed in nursing, because varied as the field is, there's something for everybody. Education, informatics, sales. There's really, even if you aren't in love with patient care, you can build on that experience and move on to other areas and still be in a nursing field.
Absolutely. There's so much you can do. There's just the possibilities are limitless, really. So,
absolutely.
The last question I have for you is a hard one. It's called 3 things. And what I'm going to ask you to do is give 3 things an ER nurse should remember, and 3 things an ER nurse can just forget.
Oh, that's a good one. Okay. You have to remember, if you didn't document it, it didn't happen. Because everyone gets subpoenaed who works in the ER.
Amen.
That's number 1. Number 2, I think, would be never make assumptions about your patients or your coworkers, or anybody in your department, because you really don't know where they're coming from. In any case, so many nurses that you work with might seem slow, or like they're not doing enough, but you don't know if they're working 2 jobs. You don't know if they have little kids at home where they're not sleeping. You don't know if they're taking care of their elderly parents. You don't know if they're in school trying to bridge to the next degree so that they don't get fired from their job. You really never know. So I think even as important it is not to make assumptions about your patients, you also have to do that with your colleagues. And a third thing would be, I think, again, to keep an open mind and be flexible, because I think that's so important and essential in emergency nursing, because it's like you said, you never know what's going to come through the front door, the back door, hour to hour, minute to minute, it can change. And emergency nursing is just changing, all the time.
Always.
With new research coming out, new standards of care, new education that's going to be implemented and strategies and stuff. So I think even the culture of nursing, social media, all of it is is causing a massive change in things. So I think being flexible and open-minded is essential.
Yep.
And then 3 things they can forget. Let's see. I feel that you can forget anything about white scrubs. I'm so against white scrubs. I know there are facilities out there that put their nurses in the ER in white scrubs. But if there was one thing that could be illegal in emergency nursing, it would be white scrubs. I started in a facility with white tops, and I just was always covered in betadine and charcoal and blood. And I just feel like that time has passed. I feel that you can forget I don't want to say care plans, but I used to write a lot of them in nursing school. And so far in my emergency nursing career, it's never quite been that detailed document. You always have to have a clear care plan in your mind, but I just feel that you can forget writing like some big diagram of care, because in documentation that won't really happen. It has to be in your heart and it has to be in your head, 100%. It has to be constantly evolving. But that like multiple grid scenario where everything's as evidenced by related to, you can move on from that.
No, weren't those just the worst? Which is so hard
because as much time as you spend on them in nursing school.
Yeah.
Painful.
I bet yours were super detailed, weren't they?
They were and they weren't. Like they.
No? I'm totally making a judgment going, I bet hers were like crisp, on point.
I'm a really type A person, but I'm also a person that likes to get it done and usually overcommits myself. So they made the mistake of having digital resources and not checking for copy paste. So mine were really long. And I'm glad I'm really far from nursing school now, but they often looked very similar to our online manuals and resources, I will say that.
Yeah.
And I think you could also forget Oh, I know. You can forget keeping the patient dressed in the room. That thing like burns my buns more than when people bring a sick patient, and I'm not talking about the toe pain in urgent care. Like I'm talking about like chest pain, abdominal pain, or whatever. Brings them to a room and doesn't put them in a gown. I don't mind if you leave their socks on or something like that, but the whole idea of being able to do a thorough assessment with all their clothes on, especially pediatric patients, because you can't really tell how they're breathing or, how the skin signs are. You can forget the whole, grandma has 25 layers on. We'll let her keep them on.
No,
you got to get it all off. You got to get them down to their skivvies. Usually the skivvies got to come off. And you can wrap them in as many warm blankets as you want if it's clinically appropriate, but you got to get them down because you don't really know what's going on until you get under all those layers. And I just saw a talk by Terry Foster who says for every decade someone is over 50, they will have an extra layer of clothing on. So if they're 105, you can definitely anticipate that you're going to be digging, through those layers of sweaters and things. But you just got to get them undressed no matter how much the patient might not be liking that.
That's funny. I used to work with a doc, and the doc was like, she wouldn't even walk in the room if the patient wasn't in a gown. She was like, they got to be in a gown. And I remember for the longest time being like, why do you have to be so unreasonable? Why do you have to do that? And she was like, I have to assess them, Kevin. I can't assess them if they're fully dressed and she took it to an unreasonable extreme, but now I get it. Now I look back and I go, oh, okay. She wasn't just crazy. I get why you need to do that.
And it goes so much further. Like you don't really realize what you're missing until you get people undressed. Like you might be missing that medical device, like the ostomy bag or the Foley or whatnot. You might be missing, abuse indicators if there's bruising all over the place. On a safety issue, you might be missing weapons that are buried in all their clothes, and you'll be really happy you took that away from them. And often I find patients are really honest about things. So like as you're getting them undressed, they'll be like, oh, I have some cap syringes in my sock, so just be careful. Or, I have a machete down this leg of my pants. Don't hurt yourself. They're usually pretty agreeable. And then when they're not agreeable, that's when I go on high alert, because there's no reason for people usually to want to keep their clothes on unless they say I'm just cold. And then usually if you offer them that miraculous warm blanket, they're more than willing to make that trade.
Yeah, absolutely. We had a homeless gentleman who lived down the streets, and he had got stabbed in the left flank. He got stabbed in the left flank, and he had a pretty good laceration, but they weren't sure how old it was, so they left it open for a few days. And this guy came in, if not daily, real close to daily, and it was always funny, because you can tell what paramedics assessed their patients and looked at their skin, and which ones didn't. Because they'd bring him in, they'd be like, oh yeah, here's Joe, he's fine. And I was like, oh, how's his stab wound? And they were like, what? Huh? What? And he still, and I'd be like, oh yeah, he's got a stab wound to his left flank. And they just looked at me like, no, he doesn't. And they start lifting up, and they're like, oh my God. And I'm like, it's fine, it's been there for a while. Because it was left open, and they never closed it, and it was, this big gaping wound for I don't know how long. But it was funny because you knew who assessed their patient and who didn't.
Absolutely. That's a great example. 100%. And especially if you're talking about kids, I feel like I've found so many things that I would have missed if I'd kept them dressed. And that goes in triage when you start to weigh them and do the rectal temp for the really little kids. It's like, you really just got to get them naked, because otherwise you're going to miss the rash, you're going to miss the bruise, you're going to miss so many things that get hidden in there.
Yep, absolutely. So tell the audience a little bit about what you're doing now with New Thing Nurse.
Okay, so I own this company, New Thing Nurse, and it is a professional and academic coaching company that offers services to support aspiring nurses, nursing students, and experienced nurses and all their new things. And that includes like new jobs, new school, new passion projects, new businesses. And with that, there's a couple of exciting things going on. So I'm offering ongoing services, and right now we're in high season with new grads, and I do a lot of document preparation. So I'm working really hard with a lot of great clients, trying to help them launch their nursing career as they start to graduate by helping them craft an amazing, modern, eye-catching resume, cover letter, and nurse portfolios, especially for the California nurse new grads. And we're also doing a partnership with the Emergency Nurses Association, which if ER nurses do nothing else in their life, they should totally join ENA.
Absolutely.
But we're partnering, absolutely. Like the best thing besides nursing I ever did was join ENA. I'll put that plug in there for free. And New Thing Nurse is partnering with ENA with the hashtag Make It Happen campaign. And we have a great website that's offering resources to nursing students and new grad nurses as maybe they're interested in going to emergency nursing or starting an emergency nursing career. How do you get into ER nursing? What makes you a better candidate? We have all kinds of tips and tricks on there, ranging from what's a good resume and cover letter look like, interview tips, how to make your resume look even more attractive with volunteer opportunities or work opportunities that you can do starting now. We have some really great content from the ENA Connection people who are putting together like tips for a great emergency nursing capstone project and things like that. So that's been really fun.
That's awesome.
And then, it's been really exciting. And it just launched at NSNA. They made the big announcement at the conference, and we're slowly launching that now. And then I'm also doing a couple more speaking opportunities this year. I'll be speaking at Emergency Nursing 19 in Austin, Texas. And I know, I'm so excited to come down to Texas, see you guys. And I'll be speaking about, my talk is called Traumatized Nursing, and my experience being a trauma nurse and kind of the burnout I experienced and how I literally and metaphorically hit a wall and came back from it, and then evidence-based practices that you personally can do and an institution can do to help mitigate burnout in your own practice and then in through the emergency department itself.
Awesome.
So that'll be really fun. Yeah, that's the big one, event in the fall, and then a few other small events. And you can always check out everything that's going on with the New Thing Nurse at the website, www.newthingnurse.com. And I'm always trying to put out new stuff out there so that you guys have stuff on the blog to read and can stay up to date on our upcoming events and services. And it's just a really lovely community we have going on.
That's awesome. Boy,
yeah.
you got a lot going on. You're busy.
Yeah. Yeah, it's been a busy year, I must say. Like, it really kicked up. I feel like last summer and just hasn't really stopped. Since
Yeah.
then.
That's awesome.
Yeah. A lot going on.
Very cool. Well, I can't thank you enough for spending the time to talk to me and answer my questions for me. I really appreciate it. This was a lot of fun.
Absolutely. I hope it's good enough for your listeners and for you. And I'm so excited about your new podcast. I think this is going to be a fabulous project and just a great thing to share with the emergency nursing and the nursing community in general.
I think so. I'm really excited about it. I'm such an avid podcast listener, so I'm really excited to actually do one. So it's really cool. So I really hope you enjoyed that episode with Sarah Wells. I want to let you know that Sarah's going to be coming back for a second visit to the Art of Emergency Nursing. And in that episode, I'm going to give you, the audience, a chance to interact with Sarah. So keep an eye on our social media for both the New Thing Nurse and the Art of Emergency Nursing for more details. And you'll be hearing more from her soon. Thanks for listening. And I would appreciate a rating and review in your podcast player of choice.
Thanks for listening to the Art of Emergency Nursing podcast. Make sure to subscribe to the podcast and follow us on Facebook.
Projects, and we're always trying to support each other in that way, and I just love that so much.
Hold on one second. That's my dog. Sometimes you'll hear them on the podcast. Hold on. Hey, come lay down. Lay down. Go sleep. I joke that. Lay down. Like one or the other of my dogs is typically right here. So. And
like your co-host.
That's right. And hopefully they don't bark like they did just now. So,
no worries.
So you hear them barking, just pause for a minute and we'll pick back up.
No worries.
All right.